In 1906 in Los Angeles, there was an event that came to be known as the Azusa Street Revival. And it was led by a preacher named William J. Seymour. And Seymour was a student a year earlier of Charles Parham. And these two men were instrumental in launching the modern day Pentecostal movement, or the modern day tongues movement. I'd like to say this before we go further. I believe in speaking in tongues, but only as the Bible defines speaking in tongues. The word tongues in these first few verses is translated from the Greek word glossolalia, and I'm sure you're all familiar with that. And glossolalia simply means languages, and they are words with specific meanings. It's not some incoherent, incomprehensible babbling, all right? And babble, by the way, babbling or to babble comes from the word babel, which means confusion. When this sound came to be, the crowd came together and were confused because everyone heard them speak in his own language. When the Talmudim were given this gift of tongues, languages, whenever we hear tongues, we should think languages, they were speaking in their own native tongue. They were not speaking in a foreign language. It was the hearers who heard the languages. It had nothing to do with speaking. Galatians 5:15 says, if you bite and devour one another, beware, lest you be consumed by one another. This is exactly the attitude that some people have when they say, if you've never spoken in tongues, you don't have the Holy Spirit. They're judging. They're judging you. And they're biting and they're devouring. And they're going to be consumed. So we have to be very careful about who we say has the Ruach and who doesn't. Rav Shaul, or the Apostle Paul, says, if I speak with the tongues of men and of messengers, but do not have love, I have become as a sounding brass or a clanging cymbal. If. But the King James says, though. Though. And that's an important difference between if and though, or although. Because what Paul is doing is he is simply giving exaggerated examples to make his point. If I could move mountains. He didn't say though I could move mountains, if I could move mountains. Or if I give my body to be burned. He didn't say though, or I'm going to give my body to be burned. He says if. He's just using an example to make a point. And what is his overall point? His overall point is love. He who is speaking in a tongue, that's a language, builds up himself. But he who is prophesying builds up the assembly. Now, we might be called upon to go to some far-flung corner of the globe where we don't speak whatever language is spoken there, and we might not have an interpreter, and they might not have an interpreter. And yes, I said before, I believe in tongues. I think Yahweh could cause the people there to understand what we're saying in English to be understood in their own native tongue. And these signs shall accompany the ones who believe. In my name they shall cast out demons. They shall speak with renewed tongues. That's what our ISR translation has, renewed, and that's correct. Renewed tongues. They shall take up snakes, and if they drink any deadly drink, it shall by no means hurt them. They shall lay hands on the sick, and they shall get well. Now we have to realize that what we're reading here is a lot of metaphors. But let's stick with the renewed tongues. It doesn't say that there's new tongues, renewed. That's what Yahweh wants us to have. He wants us to have an understanding of the words that are being spoken, to build up his assembly, to build up his body, the body of Messiah. How do we know if someone has the Ruach and they don't speak in tongues? Well, we've already discussed one point, and that's Acts 5:32. And if we turn to Yeshayahu, prophet Isaiah, Yeshayahu, chapter 8, and verse 20, it says, to the Torah and to the witness, if they do not speak according to this word, it is because they have no daybreak. Or other translations say there's no light in them. If there's no light, what is there? Hoshek, darkness. So if they're not speaking according to the Torah, there's no light. And how often do you hear Christian preachers say, well, the Old Testament is done away with. It's all been nailed to the cross. And we're free from the law. They don't speak according to the Torah, and there's no light in them. Psalm 119, verse 105, says, your word is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path. Your word is the light. But Yeshayahu 8:20 says if they don't speak according to the Torah, they don't have any light. Why? Because they eliminate the word. Another way we recognize whether or not someone has the Ruach is found in a verse that should, or a couple of verses that should be familiar to every single one of us, and that's in the book of Galatians, chapter 5, you know where I'm going, verses 22 and 23. But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, trustworthiness, gentleness, self-control. 9 things. Against such there is no Torah. But there's no tongues listed here. There's no speaking in tongues. But yet it says the fruit of the Spirit. It's all these things, love and joy and peace and patience and kindness and gentleness and goodness and trustworthiness, self-control. No tongues. So if someone is exhibiting the fruits of the Spirit in their life, if they're exhibiting these fruits toward one another and toward their brethren, and they're obeying the Torah, and we have to assume, if the Scriptures are correct, that they have the Ruach.